you shouldn't have listened.
I took the night caretaker job because it came with rules that sounded boring. That mattered to me at the time. I'd just moved back into town after a breakup that hadn't ended cleanly, and I needed something quiet, something that didn't ask questions or expect enthusiasm. The posting said overnight hours, low interaction, steady pay. The interview lasted less than 15 minutes. At the end, the supervisor slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. Not a contract, just a list. Most of it was obvious. Badge access, check-in times, logging procedures. One rule was underlined. Don't rearrange anything after midnight. I remember smiling at that. It sounded like the kind of thing managers say because they're tired of people moving chairs and carts around and forgetting where they belong. I asked if there was a reason. The supervisor didn't meet my eyes when he answered. He just said, "The layout holds better if it's left alone overnight." Holds better was the phrase. It stuck with me longer than it should have. The building was a private senior living facility on the edge of town, newer construction, funded by a family whose name was on a wing I never had reason to enter. No reputation, no ghost stories. It smelled like disinfectant and warm food, even at night. My job was routine. 2 rounds an hour. Check exterior doors, walk each corridor, make sure no one wandered, log temperatures, reset the coffee station if morning staff forgot. After midnight, the residents slept. The building quieted. The air settled into something flatter. That was when the rule applied. The first 3 nights, nothing tested it. Everything stayed where it should. Chairs aligned with tables, supply carts tucked into their outlines on the floor, lamps square to the walls. The place felt designed by someone who loved right angles. I didn't think about it until the 4th night. I was finishing my 2nd round when I noticed a chair at the end of the east corridor had shifted. Not much. It was still against the wall, still out of the way, just angled slightly inward, like someone had turned to look at something and forgotten to turn back. I stopped there longer than I needed to. It wasn't the chair. It was the way the corridor felt tighter around it, like the space itself had narrowed a fraction. My shoulders prickled the way they do when someone stands too close behind you. I made a note in the log and kept walking. 20 minutes later, when I passed the same spot, the chair had rotated further. Not dragged, not scraped, just corrected. More aligned with the corridor's length, less with the wall. I stood there again, longer this time. I remember checking my watch, then the timestamp on the log, like maybe I'd misremembered the angle. The floor tiles had faint grid lines embedded in them. The chair now matched those lines more closely than it had before. I told myself it was settling, uneven leg, gravity. I left it. Alone. That became normal. Small changes between rounds, always subtle, always after midnight. A supply cart inching closer to a doorway, a lamp nudged out of alignment with the seating arrangement it had matched earlier. A side table rotated just enough that its edge lined up with the wall seam. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that felt like someone was there doing it. It was more like the building was finishing thoughts the day shift had left incomplete. I stopped logging the changes after a week, not because I was scared, because they weren't disruptions. They were corrections. I learned the building had preferences. During the day, staff moved things for convenience, to make space, to adjust for wheelchairs or walkers. At night, the building revised those decisions. I didn't question it because the results were consistent, predictable. If something was placed wrong during the day, the night nudged it back. I started feeling it before I saw it. Certain spots in the halls felt open, breathable. Others felt compressed, like standing too close to a wall you hadn't noticed until your elbow brushed it. I found myself lingering where the air felt wider, cutting my rounds short in places that felt narrow. I thought it was fatigue. Night work does that. Your sense of space gets strange when you're awake while everything else sleeps. The first time I broke the rule, it wasn't intentional. A resident's walker tipped over near the dining hall around 1:30 a.m. It blocked the emergency exit. It wasn't dramatic, just inconvenient. Still, the rule echoed in my head. Don't rearrange anything after midnight. I hesitated. Then I moved it anyway. Safety mattered more than superstition. I placed it carefully, out of the path, wheels locked. The rest of the shift felt off. Not wrong, off. My footsteps echoed sharper than usual. Sounds carried farther. The hum of the vending machine down the hall felt closer, like it was following me between corridors. When I came back around, the walker wasn't where I'd put it. It was back near the exit, but aligned differently. Perfectly parallel to the wall. Handles squared, wheels straight. More precise than I'd left it. I stood there longer than I should have, hands on my hips like I was waiting for someone to explain it. No scrape marks, no sign it had been dragged. That was when the rule shifted in my mind. It wasn't about where things were. It was about who was allowed to decide. The building didn't react immediately. There was no punishment, no escalation. It waited. Over the next week, I started noticing how my own movement fit into the layout. Certain routes felt easier than others. Not shorter, just smoother. Turns that used to feel natural began to resist me. I'd slow down without realizing it, hesitate at corners, feel the urge to backtrack and take a different haul. When I lingered somewhere too long, something small would happen. A distant click, a cart, wheel settling. A door latch adjusting itself a fraction. Never loud, never startling, just enough to suggest I should keep moving. I adapted without noticing. I changed my rounds. I stopped cutting through certain spaces. I avoided standing in places where the air felt tight. I didn't fight the building because fighting implied conflict. This felt more like negotiation. Then my body started cooperating without asking. I noticed it first at the end of my shifts. I kept ending up in the same spot when I finished my final round, the doorway of the staff lounge. I didn't remember choosing it. I'd look down and realize I was there, hand resting on the frame, shoulders angled to match the door. The position felt comfortable, balanced. One night, I tried to stop myself halfway there. Not dramatically, I just paused in the hall and decided to go the long way back to the desk instead. My legs didn't move. It wasn't paralysis. There was no pain, just resistance. Like pushing against furniture that didn't want to slide. I laughed once under my breath because the situation felt ridiculous. Then I gave in and finished the walk. The moment I stepped into the doorway, the pressure in my calves eased. My shoulders relaxed. My breathing settled. That scared me more than if something had grabbed me. The logbook started changing around the same time. My handwriting stayed the same. The pen pressure, the slant, all familiar. But entries appeared that I didn't remember writing. Short notes. Alignment satisfactory. Night conditions stable. The times were rounded to even intervals I never used. Midnight, 1, 2. I told myself I was dissociating. Night work messes with memory. Everyone says that. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want questions. The failure came quietly. A resident fell. She wasn't badly hurt, just bruised. Still, an incident report had to be filed. Her room layout had shifted overnight. The bed, inches, closer to the wall. The chair angled inward. She said it felt harder to move in there. Not tighter, harder, like the room leaned. Day staff assumed another resident had wandered in and bumped things. They rearranged the furniture for convenience. I knew what would happen. That night, the building would correct it. I decided to help. I waited until after midnight and went into her room. The moment I touched the bed frame, something in my balance shifted. The room felt shallower, like the space between walls had compressed into a photograph of itself. I pushed anyway. The resistance wasn't force, it was orientation. The angles felt wrong. The bed didn't want to align the way I was aligning it. I forced it back to where it had been. The air in the room felt relieved, open. I left before anything else could happen. The rest of the night unraveled. Corridors shortened, turns came too soon. I'd leave one wing and arrive back where I started without remembering that transition. My rounds overlapped themselves. The building folded my roots inward. I stopped checking my watch because time felt unreliable. By morning, everything was correct again. The bed was against the wall. The chair faced inward. The resident said her room felt better. My name was gone from the schedule. No termination meeting, no call, just absence. I still work nights, different places, different buildings. But sometimes when I walk narrow hallways or pause in door frames, my body shifts into positions I didn't choose. Squared, aligned, waiting. Like I'm checking myself back into a place that already knows where I belong. We bought the house in January because it was the only month we could afford it. That's the honest answer. If you'd asked me then, I would have dressed it up. I would have talked about timing, about wanting a quiet place, about starting over. All that was true, in a way, but the reason we ended up on that back road, taking a left at the rusted mailbox and another left at the split-rail fence, was money. Winter listings sit. Winter prices drop. Winter makes people desperate to stop paying taxes on an empty place. The house was a two-story colonial set back from the road with a yard that looked too big for the neighborhood. The snow was shallow that year, just a dusting over dead grass, but the backyard still felt darker than it should have. A line of trees cut the property off from the next lot. One of those trees was an oak that leaned toward the house at a bad angle, like someone had started to push it and stopped. When the realtor opened the back door during the showing, the cold that rolled in from the yard had a smell to it. Wet dirt. Not mud, not garden soil, just that raw earth smell you get when you turn over a shovel in winter and the ground is still soft underneath. I remember my wife Jenna pausing in the kitchen and rubbing the side of her nose like the smell had gotten into her sinuses. "It's probably the basement," the realtor said quickly. "Old houses hold on to smells." The basement wasn't finished, but it wasn't rotted either. Concrete floor, stone foundation, a dehumidifier humming like it had been running for years. The smell was down there too, faint but present, like the house had soil in its lungs. We closed on the house 2 weeks later and moved in with more boxes than furniture. We told ourselves we'd build it up room by room. We told ourselves we liked the quiet. It was quiet, at first. That's a detail people don't accept when they want a haunting story. They want a clean start and then a clean intrusion. They want the first night to deliver proof. This house didn't do that. It let us unpack. It let us hang curtains. It let Jenna bring in plants and arrange them on the windowsills like she was convincing the place we were staying. The first week was just winter. Radiators ticking, pipes snapping when the heat kicked on, the soft creaks of wood framing adjusting as the temperature dropped at night. I'd lived in older places before, so none of that bothered me. Jenna wasn't used to it, but she laughed it off. She said it sounded like the house was settling into us. On the third night, I woke up with the smell again. Wet dirt. Stronger than it had been during the showing. It wasn't everywhere, not the whole room. It felt localized, like a patch of air near the bedroom door had been exposed to soil. I sat up, blinked, and listened. The house was still. Jenna slept on her side, facing away from me, hair spread across the pillow. The clock on the nightstand read 2:11. I got up and opened the bedroom door. The hallway was darker than it should have been. We'd plugged in a nightlight near the stairs, but its glow felt muted, like something was absorbing it. The smell was stronger out there, almost metallic. It made my tongue taste like pennies. I walked to the top of the stairs and looked down. The nightlight was on. The living room was a dim outline below. Nothing moved. No sounds. I stood there longer than I meant to and felt the cold coming up from the first floor. It wasn't the normal winter draft. It had weight. The air felt damp. I went back to bed and tried to sleep. By morning, the smell was gone. We didn't talk about it because it felt too small, too easy to dismiss. Old house, old basement, winter moisture. On Saturday, I went into the backyard with a tape measure and a notepad because I'm the kind of person who does that when I buy something. I wanted to understand the space. I wanted to plan. The yard sloped slightly away from the house toward the line of trees. There was an old garden bed near the fence, frozen stems sticking up like fingers. The oak was bigger than I'd thought, trunk thick, bark scarred in places where branches had been cut years ago. I walked around it and noticed something odd. The snow near the base of the oak was thinner than everywhere else. Not melted completely, but thinner, as if the ground beneath it held warmth. I knelt and pressed my glove into the snow. Underneath was damp soil, dark and soft. In January. I went inside and told Jenna the oak needed to come down. I tried to phrase it as practical. It leaned toward the house. A storm could drop it. Insurance would be a nightmare. Jenna looked out the kitchen window at the tree and frowned. "It's been there forever," she said. "That's the problem," I said. "Old trees fail without warning." She didn't argue long. She trusted me with maintenance decisions. That was our arrangement. She handled the inside of the house. I handled the outside. It made us feel balanced. I called a local tree service on Monday. A man named Dennis came out, walked the yard, and looked up into the oak's branches with his hands in his pockets. "That one's got trouble," he said. "Root rot, maybe. See how the trunk's leaning? Soil looks too wet around it." He jabbed his boot near the base. The ground gave slightly. He frowned. "You got a spring here?" he asked. "I don't think so," I said. He shrugged. "Could be old drainage. Could be a pocket that holds water. We can take it down this week if the weather holds." Jenna watched from the window while we talked. She had that look she gets when she's trying to believe something is ordinary. Dennis left. We scheduled the removal for Thursday. That night, Jenna said she dreamed about digging. She said she was in the backyard with her hands in the dirt, pulling something out that wouldn't come loose. She said she woke up with her fingers cramped, like she'd been gripping something. "Probably stress," she said, laughing lightly. "I don't even garden in winter." I asked if she'd smelled the dirt smell at night. She paused, then said, "A little," like she didn't want to admit it. Like naming it would give it more weight. Thursday came. The tree crew arrived before noon. Chainsaws, ropes, a chipper loud enough to vibrate the kitchen windows. Jenna went to work in the upstairs office with headphones on. I stood outside with a mug of coffee watching them work. The oak came down in sections, limbs first, then trunk. When the trunk finally cracked and fell, the sound hit my chest like a punch. The ground shook. Snow jumped in tiny puffs along the yard. As the men cut the trunk into rounds, one of them called out to Dennis. He bent down near the stump and scraped at the soil. "Boss," he said, voice muffled by his face covering. "Come look at this." Dennis knelt. He used the tip of his glove to pull away wet soil. Something pale flashed in the dirt. For a second, my brain tried to label it as a root, then Dennis's hand froze. He glanced at me, then at his worker and said quietly, "That's an old bone." My stomach tightened. The worker said, "Animal?" Dennis didn't answer immediately. He poked again, careful now, exposing more. The shape was wrong for a deer. Too smooth, too rounded. Jenna came out onto the back porch, drawn by the pause and noise. She stood there holding her mug with both hands, shoulders tense. Dennis looked up and said, "It's probably nothing. Old dogs get buried in yards sometimes." He said it too quickly. He told his worker to cover it back up. They threw soil over it and moved on, cutting the stump flush and hauling the rounds away. Within an hour, the oak was gone, replaced by a raw circle of wet earth where the stump had been. The snow around it looked dirty, stained brown. When the crew left, the yard felt exposed. The line of trees looked farther away. The back of the house faced open space now, and I didn't like it. That night, the smell came back hard. It hit me as soon as we turned off the downstairs lights. Wet dirt, stronger than a basement smell, like fresh soil after rain. It drifted up the stairs and sat in the hallway like fog you couldn't see. Jenna stopped halfway up the stairs, hand on the rail. "Do you smell that?" she asked. I told her yes. She didn't laugh this time. We checked the basement. The dehumidifier was running. The concrete floor was dry. The sump pit was covered. Nothing looked flooded. Nothing looked broken. The smell wasn't down there as much as it was in the hallway and bedroom area. That made less sense. We went back upstairs. Jenna lit a candle in the hallway because she likes small rituals. The flame steadied, then fluttered slightly like someone had exhaled near it. Neither of us spoke. We went to bed. I slept in short bursts, waking every hour convinced someone was standing in the hallway. Each time I opened my eyes, the room looked normal. Each time I listened, there was nothing. Still, the smell never left. In the morning, there was dirt on the upstairs landing. Not a pile, not a footprint, just a thin scatter like someone had shaken soil off their shoes there. Jenna found it first. She stood at the top of the stairs and stared down, coffee in hand, face tight. "Did you bring dirt up here?" she asked. "No," I said. She crouched and touched it with her finger. It was damp, dark. We didn't have any reason to have damp soil upstairs. We hadn't been in the yard since the tree crew left. Our shoes stayed by the front door. The back door mat was clean. I swept it up, trying to keep my movements casual. Jenna watched me like she was memorizing how the dirt looked. That day, the dirt happened again. This time, it was in the guest room, on the windowsill where Jenna had placed a plant. Thin line of soil gathered behind the pot, as if the plant had been moved and set down with dirt clinging to it. Jenna lifted the pot and checked beneath it. The tray was clean, no spill, no loose soil in the pot itself. She put it back down slowly, then looked at me. "It's like the house is making it," she said, voice low. I didn't answer. I didn't have an answer. Over the next week, the dirt became routine. Always damp, always dark, always appearing in places where it shouldn't. On the upstairs landing, on the kitchen counter near the sink, in the corner of the living room by the baseboard, on the stair treads themselves as if someone had climbed them with muddy feet but without footprints. I started vacuuming more, sweeping more, wiping counters twice a day. I told myself it was winter moisture, some strange airflow from the basement pulling soil dust up. It didn't behave like dust. It behaved like soil carried in. Jenna began washing her hands too often. I'd hear the faucet running, the scrub of soap over and over. She said the smell was stuck under her nails even when they were clean. One evening, we were eating dinner at the table when Jenna paused mid-bite and stared at the kitchen floor. "Don't move," she said. Her voice was sharp enough that I froze. She pointed under the table. A thin line of dirt was forming across the tile, spreading like a slow spill. It wasn't pouring from anywhere. It was appearing, darkening the grout line as if the grout itself was bleeding soil. I stood up carefully. The dirt line continued, inching toward the pantry door. Jenna's face went pale. She whispered, "It's going to the back door." I watched it reach the pantry, then curve toward the hallway that led to the back door. Not like a liquid, like a trail being laid down, deliberate. I grabbed a towel and wiped it. The dirt smeared, then lifted. Underneath, the tile was clean. The moment it was gone, the smell sharpened, like the house had gotten irritated. That night, Jenna woke me up around 3 a.m. by squeezing my arm. "Listen," she whispered. I lay still. At first, I heard nothing. Then, faintly, from below, a soft, dragging sound, like something being pulled across a floor. Not fast, patient. I got out of bed and went to the top of the stairs. The house was dark. The dragging sound continued, steady, in the living room. I went down slowly, every step creaking under my weight. The living room was empty. The furniture was where we left it. The dragging sound stopped the moment my foot touched the first floor landing. I stood there, breath held, waiting. Then I heard something else. A soft tap. Not knocking, not a rhythmic sound, just one tap, like a pebble hitting glass. It came from the back door. I walked toward it. The smell of dirt grew stronger with each step, heavy in the air near the door like fog. The tap came again, from the lower portion of the door near the threshold. I turned on the porch light and looked through the peephole. The backyard was empty, snow faintly visible under the light. The stump area, a dark, wet circle. I opened the door. Cold air rushed in, carrying the dirt smell with it. I looked down at the threshold. There was a clump of wet soil sitting there, centered like an offering, not spread like it had been kicked, not scattered by wind. A single clump, fist-sized, damp enough to shine. I didn't touch it with my bare hands. I grabbed a dustpan and scooped it, then carried it to the trash outside. When I came back in, the dirt smell lingered, stronger than before. Jenna stood in the hallway, arms wrapped around herself. "What is it doing?" she asked. I told her I didn't know. I told her we should call someone about drainage, about the basement, anything. Jenna said, "It's not drainage." Her voice shook. "It's coming in." The next day, I dug around the stump. I didn't tell Jenna at first. I waited until she went to the grocery store, then I put on gloves and boots and went out back with a shovel. The soil around the stump was wet and soft, even though it hadn't rained. The shovel sank too easily. The ground smelled raw, like fresh excavation. The deeper I dug, the colder my hands felt, even through gloves. After about a foot, the shovel hit something firm. Not rock, something that gave slightly when pressed. I scraped carefully. A strip of fabric appeared, dark and stiff with dirt. It looked like old cloth, the kind that loses its weave over time. My mouth went dry. I scraped more. A pale shape appeared beneath the cloth. Rounded, smooth. Bone. I backed away from the hole, heart pounding, then covered it quickly like I hadn't been there. I stood in the yard, staring at the stump area, listening to the neighborhood. Birds, distant traffic, the dog barking far away. Everything normal. I went inside and washed my hands until they were red. The dirt smell stayed in my nose. When Jenna came home, I told her we needed to call the police. I told her what Dennis had seen, what I'd found. Her face tightened. She didn't argue. She nodded slowly, like she'd been waiting for a reason that fit. The police came that afternoon, 2 officers, then more. They asked questions, they dug, they found bones, more than one. They called in a forensic team, they taped off the yard. Jenna sat on the couch staring at the wall while they worked outside. She held a blanket around her shoulders even though the heat was on. I kept thinking, this will fix it. Naming something gives it a boundary. A crime scene gives it rules. A house becomes a place with evidence, not a place with intention. I was wrong. The night after the police left, the dirt got worse. It appeared in piles now, not scatters. Small mounds at the base of the stairs. A fist-sized pile on the kitchen counter by the sink. A smear across the hallway floor like someone had dragged a wet sleeve. Jenna stopped lighting candles. She stopped placing plants. She stopped making the house feel like ours. She started sleeping with her hands tucked under her body like she was hiding them. One morning, she showed me her palms. There were faint bruises there, dotted in a line. Not deep bruises, just discoloration, like pressure marks from holding something textured. "What did you do?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing," she said quickly. "I didn't do anything." Her voice carried a panic she was trying to bury. That night, I woke to a sound that didn't belong to the house. Breathing. Not mine, not Jenna's. Low, wet through the wall. It came from the hallway outside our bedroom, from the direction of the stairs. I sat up listening, every muscle tense. The breathing continued, slow and steady, as if someone was standing outside the door, nose close to the crack, inhaling the room. Jenna woke too. I could tell by the way her body stiffened. She didn't move. She didn't speak. We lay there, both of us listening until the sound stopped. I didn't go out into the hallway. I didn't turn on a light. I lay there sweating under the blanket like a coward, trying to convince myself it was the radiator, the pipes, anything. In the morning, there was dirt pressed into the carpet outside our bedroom door. Not scattered, pressed, as if something wet and heavy had been pressed down and lifted away. A shape without clear edges. Jenna stared at it, then walked to the bathroom and vomited. That was the week we started talking about selling. We didn't say it as a decision, we said it as a possibility. We said it as a way to keep moving forward, because the alternative was admitting we were trapped. We contacted an agent. We started discussing repairs, disclosures, timelines. The house didn't care. It kept working. Over the next month, the walls began to change. It started in the downstairs hallway near the back door. The paint bubbled in a small spot the size of a coin, then grew to the size of my palm. I assumed it was moisture, hidden leak. I cut into it carefully to check. Behind the paint was damp plaster, darkened like a bruise. It smelled like soil. I patched it. I repainted. Within 2 days, the bubble returned, larger. Then a second bubble formed farther down the hall. Then a third. Jenna wouldn't walk down that hallway alone anymore. She'd stand in the kitchen and call me if she needed something from the laundry room. At night, the dragging sound returned, always in that hallway. Slow, patient, like something being moved across the floor toward the door. I tried staying up once to catch it. I sat in the living room in the dark with a lamp on low, watching the hallway. Around 2:40 a.m., the dragging began. I leaned forward, heart pounding, listening. The sound came closer, then stopped, as if it had noticed me. The air in the living room changed, thickened. The dirt smell filled my mouth. My eyes watered. A soft pressure built at my ankles, like cold hands around my feet. I stood up fast, breaking whatever stillness I'd been holding. The pressure eased slightly, like something had backed away. I turned on every light on the first floor. The dragging stopped. I didn't sleep after that. The undeniable proof came in March. By then, the police investigation had quieted. We'd been told the remains were old, possibly decades. There was talk of missing persons cases from long ago. There were reporters in town for a week, then they moved on. Our house became that place in the neighborhood. People drove slower past it. Kids stopped cutting through our yard. Inside, it felt less like a home and more like a sealed container with something pressing against the lid. On the night it happened, Jenna had fallen asleep early. She'd been exhausted for weeks, dark circles under her eyes, jumpy at small sounds. I stayed downstairs cleaning, again, wiping counters that didn't need wiping because motion was the only thing that kept the house from feeling like it was closing in. Around 1 a.m., I heard a thump in the hallway. Not a bump, not settling. A heavy thump, like something had struck the wall from inside. I froze, cloth in hand, staring toward the dark hallway. Another thump followed, slightly higher. Then a slow creaking sound, like plaster flexing. My stomach turned cold. I walked toward the hallway with careful steps, as if loud movement would trigger something. The dirt smell was overwhelming there, thick enough to taste. The bubbles in the paint were larger now, stretched, glossy. As I watched, the central bubble swelled, rising outward like something behind it was pushing. The plaster beneath made a soft cracking sound. Then it split. Not in a clean line, in a jagged tear that opened like a mouth. Wet earth oozed through the crack. I stumbled back, shock pinning me for a second. The earth didn't fall in a pile. It pressed outward, held together like a dense mass. Dark, damp, threaded with small roots. The crack widened with a sound like tearing cloth. More earth pushed through, and with it came a smell so raw, I gagged. Then something moved inside it. Not a root shifting from gravity. Something deliberate, flexing. A thick root slid forward like a finger. It pressed against the floor, testing, then curled. My throat closed. I couldn't make sound at first. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing because it didn't fit any category that felt safe. The root curled again, and the mass of earth pushed farther out of the wall, as if the hallway itself was being turned inside out. I backed away into the kitchen, shaking, and grabbed the nearest thing I could hold, a broom, because my body wanted a tool even though my mind didn't have a plan. Behind me, footsteps thudded on the stairs. Jenna's voice, sharp with sleep and fear. "What is that?" I turned and saw her standing at the bottom step, hair wild, eyes wide. The crack in the hallway wall widened again. Earth spilled onto the floor now, thick clods slumping, roots writhing through it. A root slid out farther, longer than it should have been, and reached across the floor like an arm. It hooked around the leg of the small hallway table we kept there and pulled. The table scraped, shifted, then tipped, crashing onto its side. Jenna screamed. I rushed forward without thinking and swung the broom at the root, hard. The broom handle struck it with a dull thud, like hitting wet wood. The root recoiled slightly, then pressed again, stronger, pushing the earth mass forward. More roots followed, thin ones and thick ones, all moving with the same patient intent. The wall kept tearing. Jenna ran into the kitchen, grabbed my arm, nails digging into my skin. "Get out!" she said, voice breaking. "Get out, now!" I tried to pull her toward the front door, but my feet slipped on wet soil. The floor was coated in it now, dark streaks stretching from the hallway to the kitchen tile. The roots reached farther, dragging more earth with them. One root brushed my ankle. The contact was cold enough to numb. It felt like wet clay pressed against skin, then tightening. It curled around my ankle. Not a gentle wrap, a firm grip that sent a jolt of pain up my leg. I shouted then, loud and raw, and swung the broom down again, trying to break it loose. The root tightened. I felt it pull. I fell hard onto the tile, shoulder slamming, breath knocked out of me. Jenna screamed again and tried to pull me by my arms, sliding on the soil. The root dragged me an inch toward the hallway, then another inch. It wasn't fast. It wasn't violent in the way people expect. It was steady, like an animal pulling something it had already claimed. I shoved the broom handle under the root loop around my ankle and twisted, using it like a lever. The root resisted, then loosened slightly. I yanked my leg free and scrambled backward, kicking soil, heart racing so hard it made my vision blur. Jenna dragged me upright and we stumbled to the front door. We didn't stop to grab coats. We didn't stop to grab keys. We burst outside into the cold March air and stood on the porch, shaking, barefoot, staring through the front windows at the light-filled house that suddenly felt like a trap. Inside, the hallway light flickered. The dragging sound started again, louder now, as if whatever was inside that wall was pulling the earth back through. The next thing we saw made my stomach drop even lower. The dirt was moving. Not being pushed by roots now, sliding across the floor in a slow stream drawn toward the hallway like a tide going backward. The roots vanished one by one into the torn wall. The clods of earth followed, pulled as if by suction. Within minutes, the hallway floor was cleaner than it had been in weeks. The wall crack began to close, not healing, collapsing. Plaster crumbled inward, then settled, leaving a jagged scar. The dragging sound stopped. The house looked quiet again, as if nothing had happened. Jenna started sobbing on the porch, hands covering her mouth. I stared at my ankle. There was a bruise already forming, dark and ringed, the exact shape of the root loop. Inside the bruise, thin lines spread outward like veins, like root traces under skin. We stayed outside until dawn. We didn't go back in. At first light, we called a friend and asked if we could stay with them. We didn't explain, we just said something happened. By afternoon, I went back to the house alone because someone had to, because adults do that, even when they're terrified. The hallway wall looked normal from a distance. Up close, the paint was cracked and uneven. There was a smear on the baseboard that looked like dried mud. I touched the wall with the back of my fingers. It was cold, damp. The dirt smell rose immediately, like breath from soil. We never slept there again. We tried to sell, but the disclosures were a knot. The investigation, the remains, the damage. We were advised to wait. We rented a small apartment in town and paid for 2 places at once until our savings bled thin. Friends asked why we left. We gave answers that sounded sane. Mold, structural issues, anxiety. None of it carried the real shape of it. Sometimes at night, in the apartment, I'd wake up with the dirt smell in my nose and my ankle throbbing where the bruise had been. The bruise faded after weeks, but the root-like lines under my skin stayed faintly visible for months, like a stain that didn't fully wash out. In June, the police called to tell us they'd identified the remains as belonging to a missing man from the early 1980s. They asked if we'd noticed anything else in the yard, any other disturbances, any other places the soil stayed wet. I told them about the stump area. I told them about the smell. I did not tell them about the wall. I could picture their faces, the polite skepticism, the way they'd try to file it under trauma response. I didn't want that. We went back once in late summer to collect the last of our things. The yard looked ordinary in daylight. The stump area had been filled in, reseeded by the city. Grass grew there now, a slightly darker patch. The house smelled cleaner in summer, less damp. The dirt smell was faint. Jenna moved quickly through rooms, eyes down, not looking at corners. I followed, carrying boxes, refusing to stand still. In the hallway near the back door, the paint had been patched by a contractor we'd hired months ago. Smooth, fresh, almost normal. As we carried the last box toward the front, Jenna paused and looked down at the floor. "What?" I said, already tense. She pointed to a thin line across the hallway tile. Dirt. Not a pile. A line, dark and damp, drawn straight toward the back door. My stomach turned. The line wasn't there when we arrived. We would have seen it. I wiped it with my shoe without thinking. It smeared, then vanished. Underneath, the tile looked clean. The smell sharpened instantly, like it had been waiting for attention. Jenna grabbed my sleeve and pulled me toward the front door. We left without closing the interior doors behind us. On the porch, Jenna whispered, "It knows we came back." I didn't answer. I didn't want to agree out loud. We drove away and didn't look back. I wish I could say it ended there. It didn't. Even now, years later, certain smells stop me cold. Fresh soil, wet mulch, the raw scent of earth after someone digs a hole. My body reacts before my mind can. My ankle aches, a phantom pressure ring. My hands go numb. If I stand in a narrow hallway too long, I feel damp cold climb up from the floor, faint at first, then heavier, like the air is gathering weight. I avoid basements. I avoid back doors. I avoid places where the ground stays wet. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up convinced I can hear dragging in the apartment hallway outside our door. A slow scrape, patient, steady. When I hold my breath and listen, there's nothing. Still, I keep my feet off the floor until I'm fully awake. Because once you've felt something cold and alive tighten around your ankle and pull, you stop trusting quiet. You stop believing that a wall is solid. You start thinking about what a house can hold when it's been fed for decades, and what it does when you cut down the one thing that kept it rooted. And every winter, when the air turns damp and the ground softens under frost, I smell dirt where there shouldn't be dirt, and I find myself checking the corners of rooms, not for shapes, not for shadows, just for the first dark smear on clean tile that says the house is still trying to come back in. I didn't want to stay at my sister's place. I can say it plainly now because enough time has passed that I don't have to soften it for anyone. At the time, I kept telling myself I was being dramatic. I'd just ended a lease in a hurry, my new place wasn't ready, and her spare room was an easy solution. She lived outside the city now, in a rental she and her husband had moved into 2 months earlier. A week, she said. 10 days at most. I could sleep, shower, regroup. She made it sound like a normal thing families do, and it should have been. The house was newer construction, built in the early 2000s, one of those narrow 2-story places in a neighborhood where every driveway looks identical. Beige siding, little front porch, a tree planted in the same spot in every yard. The kind of area you drive through once and forget. I remember thinking, as I carried my bag up the walkway, that the house looked smaller than it had in her photos. The windows were narrower. The front door sat slightly off-center, like the builder had misjudged the symmetry and hoped no one would stare long enough to notice. Inside, it smelled like paint and old carpet and something sweet that didn't belong to either, like potpourri that had been in a box too long. My sister was excited. She always gets excited when she's trying to make something feel like home. Her husband was polite in that strained way people get when they're hosting someone they didn't invite themselves. Their son, 16 then, nodded once, and went back upstairs without speaking. They gave me the spare room at the end of the hall on the second floor. Small bed, dresser, a window that faced the backyard fence. The room felt fine. It felt like a room in a rental, blank almost. The first night passed without anything happening. That detail matters to me because when people hear what I'm about to say, they expect a moment, a sound, a shadow, something that announces itself so you can point at it later and say, that was the beginning. It wasn't like that. If there was a beginning, it started in a way that felt ordinary enough that you'd never call it a warning. It started with how we sat. We fell into habits fast. My sister claimed the left end of the couch like she'd always lived there. Her husband leaned against the kitchen counter whenever he talked, weight on one heel, arms crossed. Their son did homework at the dining table with his back to the wall, shoulders hunched like he was protecting his screen. I took the armchair near the hallway that led to the stairs. It was a convenient spot, close enough to be part of the room, far enough that I could excuse myself without making a scene. No one assigned these places. No one discussed it. We just did it, the way water finds grooves. On the second night, I noticed the air felt different depending on where you were. That sounds like nonsense written down, and I know how it reads. I would have rolled my eyes if someone else said it. All I mean is, some spots in that living room felt easy on the lungs, like you could breathe deep without thinking. Other spots felt tight, like you were standing in a doorway too long while someone tried to pass. I kept adjusting my posture without realizing it, sitting up straighter, shifting my shoulders, moving my feet. The chair I'd chosen seemed to hold me better than the couch did. The couch felt like it tilted slightly toward the hallway, even though it obviously didn't. My sister's husband, Evan, sat in my armchair one evening by accident. He came home late, dropped his bag by the door, and sat down without looking. He'd been working longer hours since the move. He complained about traffic, about the commute, about a supervisor he didn't like. He didn't sit long, maybe 5 minutes. But during those 5 minutes, the room didn't settle the way it usually did. My sister kept pausing mid-sentence and starting over. The TV volume felt wrong, no matter how she adjusted it. Their son came down the stairs and stopped halfway, staring at the room like he'd forgotten what he came for. Evan rubbed his neck and stood up like he'd been sitting on something sharp. He didn't say anything about it. He just moved to the kitchen and leaned against the counter, his usual place. I sat back down in the armchair. It's hard to explain how quickly everything smoothed out. Not like a switch, more like a conversation that had been mistimed suddenly finding the rhythm again. My sister finished her thought. The TV sounded normal. Their son came down and walked to the fridge without hesitating. We didn't talk about it. We didn't have words for it. I didn't even fully admit to myself that I'd noticed until later that night when I went upstairs and stood in the hall outside my room. I had this brief, irrational sensation that the hallway was waiting for me to keep moving, the way a cashier waits when you stop digging for your card. I went into my room quickly and shut the door behind me. I stood there with my hand on the knob longer than I needed to, listening to the house. It was quiet. No creaks, no settling, no pipes. But I felt watched. Not in the dramatic sense, not like someone was behind me. More like the air itself had attention, like the space was aware of where I was standing. I slept badly that night. Not nightmares, just shallow sleep, waking every hour with my mouth dry. The third day was ordinary enough that it lulled me again. We ate breakfast, my sister went to work, Evan left later. Their son stayed home because it was a weekend and he spent most of it in his room. I was alone in the house for long stretches, unpacking my bag, checking email, trying to pretend I wasn't living out of one suitcase. The house felt calmer when I was alone. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. When I moved around downstairs during the day, it felt like I was walking through someone else's set. Like the furniture was placed for a scene I hadn't been cast in. I kept catching myself stepping around invisible boundaries. It wasn't superstition, it was body instinct. I'd go to cross between the coffee table and the couch, and my feet would angle wider like I was avoiding something on the floor. I started doing small tests without naming them as tests. I stood in the center of the living room and waited. At first, it felt fine. Then the air began to press inward, subtle enough that it could have been my own nerves. My shoulders rose, my jaw clenched. I shifted my weight, trying to relieve it, but that only made it worse. Like the pressure didn't want me moving there. When I stepped back to the armchair, it eased. I walked to the kitchen and leaned against the counter the way Evan did. The air felt open, calm. My breathing deepened. I moved to the other side of the kitchen and leaned there instead. The pressure returned, not intense, just persistent. A mild discomfort that grew the longer I ignored it. I stopped, laughed at myself quietly, and went back to the spot by the sink that Evan always used. It eased again. That night, when everyone was home, I watched their habits more closely. My sister never stood in the hallway that connected the living room to the laundry room. She passed through it quickly, like she didn't want to linger. Evan always paused at the same tile in the kitchen before turning toward the stairs, like he was waiting for permission. Their son avoided the bottom step unless he was actually going upstairs. He'd stand on the second-to-last step and call down like the first step had a rule attached to it. I didn't point any of this out. I didn't want to sound insane. Instead, I started participating in the pattern. I sat in my chair at night and stayed there. I stopped pacing. I stopped shifting my legs restlessly. I stopped getting up repeatedly for water. The house liked that. Can't explain how I know it, but I do. There was a kind of quiet approval in the way the air stayed loose when I behaved. If I moved too much, the house reminded me. Not with a bang, with small discomforts. If I stood in the archway between the living room and kitchen too long, my ears would feel full, like altitude change. If I leaned on the banister halfway up the stairs, my skin would itch along my forearms until I moved. Once, I left my phone on the dining table and walked away. When I came back, it had shifted a few inches, aligned perfectly with the table edge. I stared at it and tried to come up with a reason. The table wasn't tilted. The phone wasn't vibrating. No one else was downstairs. I picked it up and the pressure returned in my ears until I left the dining area. I started avoiding the table. By the fourth night, it felt like the house wasn't just remembering our habits. It was recording them. There's a difference. Memory implies something passive. Recording implies intention. I began noticing that the house anticipated where we would be. The light in the hallway upstairs seemed to brighten slightly a second before someone stepped out of their room. The kitchen fan clicked once, softly, right before Evan walked in after work. Again, none of this was dramatic. If I'd been told about it, I would have said it was coincidence, electrical quirks, new house settling. But it didn't feel random. It felt like the house was keeping us on schedule. My sister hosted a small dinner on the fifth day. 2 of her friends from work, a couple I'd met once years ago. It was nothing big, pasta, salad, wine, normal, talking over each other warmth. The kind of thing my sister liked because it made her feel established. The house didn't like it. It didn't object immediately. It waited until people started to settle into their own rhythms, until they started choosing seats, leaning in doorways, drifting around the living room. Then, it began correcting. One of my sister's friends, a woman named Tara, stood near the bottom of the stairs while talking and kept shifting her weight from foot to foot. After a few minutes, she stopped mid-sentence and blinked hard, like she'd lost her place. She laughed awkwardly and asked someone to repeat what she'd said. No one could. She'd been talking, but none of us remembered the words. A man from the couple kept sitting on the arm of the couch, standing back up, sitting again, restless. His voice got sharper as the night went on, like irritation had landed on him from above. My sister's son started watching him the way you watch someone who might break a glass. At one point, Tara went to the kitchen and leaned on the wrong section of counter, on the far end, near the pantry instead of the spot by the sink where Evan always leaned. She winced and rubbed her forearm like she'd brushed a hot surface. "There's something sharp here," she said. There was. Nothing sharp, we checked. Smooth laminate, no edges. She wouldn't lean there again. She shifted 2 feet to the left and immediately relaxed. They all left early. Not dramatically, just excuses. Early morning, long drive, tired. After the door shut, the house felt like it exhaled. That's the only way I can describe the shift. The air loosened. The pressure in my ears vanished. My sister's shoulders dropped, like she'd been carrying a weight she hadn't noticed. She looked around and said, "This place always feels weird after people come over." Evan gave a quick laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "It's just the echo. It's a box." Their son said nothing. He kept staring at the stairs. I started sleeping with my door cracked after that. Not because I was afraid of something entering, because the hallway felt like it needed to know where I was. Leaving the door fully shut made the room feel smaller, like the air inside it didn't circulate. With the door cracked, my breathing eased. I told myself it was heat, ventilation, anything. On the 6th day, the house began doing something new. It began correcting us, not just objects. I noticed it with my sister first. She came home from work, dropped her keys in the bowl by the door, and walked to the living room. She paused in the middle of the room, the exact spot that always felt tight to me, and just stood there. Her face went blank, like she'd forgotten what she was doing. Then she turned and walked to her spot on the couch, sat down, and blinked like she'd woken up. I asked if she was okay. She frowned slightly and said, "Yeah, why?" I didn't tell her what I'd seen. That night, Evan did it too. He walked into the kitchen, stopped at the wrong tile, the one he never stopped at, and his shoulders rose like he'd braced against wind. He exhaled hard and moved back to his usual tile, then continued upstairs like nothing had happened. Their son began avoiding the stairs entirely. He started sleeping with a blanket on the couch. When my sister told him to go to his room, he argued in a flat, stubborn way that didn't sound like him. "I can't," he said once, and then looked embarrassed, like he hadn't meant to say it out loud. My sister snapped at him. Teenager stuff. She didn't connect it to the house. I started keeping track of time by meals and routines. The house felt different after midnight. More awake. Less tolerant. It wasn't like story 1 where midnight had been a rule. Here, it was more like the house switched from passive to active when the neighborhood fell silent. The first night I really understood I wasn't imagining it was when I tried to break the pattern on purpose. I went downstairs around 1:15 a.m. alone. The living room was dark except for the faint glow from the hallway nightlight. I walked to the center of the room, the tight spot, and sat down on the floor. It felt childish as soon as I did it, like daring the dark. At first, nothing happened. Then the pressure began, slow and steady. My ears filled, my throat tightened. It felt like my body was being asked to move, politely at first, then more insistently. I stayed. My skin began to itch along my ribs and lower back like someone had brushed fiberglass against me. My breathing shortened, my heart rate rose. It wasn't fear, it was discomfort. I stood up, shaking my hands out like I could throw the sensation off. The moment I stepped away from the center spot toward the armchair, it eased. It wasn't subtle. It was immediate relief, like stepping out of a cramped elevator into open air. I stood next to the armchair and laughed under my breath again because I didn't have any other outlet. I felt stupid. I felt watched. Then I realized something worse. I hadn't chosen to step toward the armchair. My feet had moved before my mind decided. I went back upstairs and slept with my door cracked wider. On the 7th day, my sister rearranged the living room. It wasn't a big redecorating thing. She just pulled the couch out to vacuum and nudged the coffee table to reach under it. She put everything back quickly, distracted, the way people do when they're doing chores in a house they don't fully love yet. But she didn't put it back exactly. Off by inches. I felt it the moment I walked into the room. The air didn't sit right. The space felt slanted. My breathing tightened as if the room had gotten smaller. My sister noticed too. She frowned and said, "Why does it feel, I don't know, like crooked?" Evan tried to laugh it off. "It's in your head." Their son stood at the bottom of the stairs staring at the couch like it had offended him. I offered to help fix it. That was the failure. We pushed the couch, together, small adjustments. Evan measured the distance from the wall with his foot like he was eyeballing it. My sister straightened a throw pillow and stepped back to evaluate. The air never eased. No matter how we adjusted, it still felt wrong. My sister got frustrated and said, "Forget it, it's fine." She went to the kitchen and slammed a cabinet harder than she needed to. The house waited until night. That evening, the whole house felt alert. It's strange to say that about a building, but that's what it felt like. A quiet attentiveness in the rooms, like someone listening from another floor. We tried to ignore it. We watched TV, we ate. My sister kept checking her phone. Evan kept rubbing his neck. Their son refused to go upstairs. My sister argued with him. Evan tried to mediate. I sat in my armchair and felt the air tighten each time someone raised their voice, like the house didn't tolerate disorder. Eventually, my sister relented and told her son he could sleep on the couch, just tonight. The couch that had been moved. The couch that felt wrong. I watched him lie down, shoulders tense, eyes open. I didn't. Sleep. I dozed, maybe. The kind of sleep where you're still listening, still aware of the house. Sometime after midnight, I woke up standing. I was in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, hand on the frame, weight balanced like I'd been placed there. My feet ached the way they ache when you've stood still too long. My calves felt tight. I didn't remember getting up. I didn't remember walking there. The room was dim. The hallway nightlight threw a soft line across the floor. The couch was a darker shape against the wall, and my sister's son was on it, facing away. I blinked, and my mind tried to produce a reason. Sleepwalking, stress, new environment. Then I noticed the couch. It had shifted. Not by much, maybe 2 inches, but it was now aligned with the tile lines in a way it hadn't been earlier. The coffee table, too, nudged, squared. The house had corrected what we'd changed, and I had been standing in the doorway like a guard while it did it. I went back to my chair and sat down slowly, like I was afraid sudden movement would trigger the pressure again. My sister's son turned over on the couch, still asleep. His face twitched like he was dreaming. His hands were clenched. The air felt easier now. The living room had settled. My heart kept pounding anyway. In the morning, none of them remembered anything unusual. My sister complained about sleeping badly. Evan said he'd had a headache. Their son said he felt like he'd been holding his breath all night. I asked him what he meant. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. Like when you're underwater? Like you forget to breathe normal? My sister laughed and said he was being dramatic. He didn't laugh back. That day, I tried to keep myself busy outside the house. Took a walk, went to a coffee shop, called my landlord, anything to avoid being alone in that space. When I returned, my sister was sitting in her spot on the couch, staring at nothing. Not daydreaming, staring. I said her name twice before she blinked and looked at me like she'd been pulled from far away. She smiled too quickly. "Sorry, I'm just tired." Evan came home and went straight to the kitchen, leaned against the counter and stayed there longer than he needed to, like the counter was the only place that felt safe. That night, my sister said we should call the landlord. Evan didn't argue. That scared me more than if he had. The landlord came the next afternoon. He was a man in his late 50s with a calm face, the kind of person who smiles like he's practiced it in mirrors. He walked through the house with his hands in his pockets, nodding at nothing. My sister explained the feeling, the crookedness, the weird energy after people visited, the way the son didn't want to go upstairs. The landlord listened like he'd heard it before. He didn't dismiss her. He didn't act surprised. He just hummed thoughtfully and said, "People always try to make a place their own." He stopped in the living room and looked at the couch. He didn't touch it. He just looked at the space around it like he was checking alignment in his head. "Some houses," he said, "hold on to their first habits." My sister asked what that meant. He smiled and said, "The way it was lived in at the beginning. The first tenants, the first routines. Sometimes a place keeps those grooves." I remember the word grooves again, like we were water, like the house was the channel. Evan asked if anything was wrong with the structure, the foundation, the wiring. The landlord shook his head. "House is solid." Then he added casually, "Try not to host too many people at once, and don't rearrange the living room. It always makes things feel unsettled." My sister stared at him. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer directly. He said, "I've had tenants complain about feelings here. They usually settle in once. They stop fighting it." Stop fighting it. He left after 15 minutes. After the door shut, my sister said, "That was weird." Evan said, "He's just an old guy, superstitious." Their son said quietly, "He knows." No one responded. That night, my sister insisted her son sleep upstairs. Evan backed her up. The son argued, voice rising, face flushing. "I can't," he said again. "I can't go up there." My sister snapped, "Yes, you can. It's your room." He stood at the bottom step, shaking, eyes fixed on the stairwell like it was a steep drop. I watched his feet. He kept shifting them, trying to find the right placement, like the steps wanted something from him. Evan reached out to guide him up, hand on his shoulder. The son jerked away and nearly fell backward. Then he did something that made my stomach drop. He took a step up, just one, and his whole body relaxed. Shoulders dropped. Breathing eased. Face smoothed. He stood on that step like he belonged there. He took another step and another, moving slowly, each foot placed carefully like he was following an invisible path. He reached the top of the stairs and turned back, expression blank. Then he went into his room and shut the door. My sister looked relieved. Evan looked shaken. I felt cold in my hands. Later, when I went upstairs, I stopped halfway down the hall outside my room and felt the pressure again. The hallway tightened around me, asking me to keep moving. I walked quickly to my room and left the door cracked. That was the last night I stayed there. Not because I made a brave choice, because something in me knew if I stayed longer, the house would finish teaching me. I packed my bag in the morning before anyone else was fully awake. My sister tried to argue. She said I was overreacting, that I was stressed from moving, that the house was fine. I told her my apartment was ready earlier than expected. I lied easily. Evan offered to help, carrying my bag. He didn't look at me while he did it. His eyes kept flicking toward the living room, toward the couch, like he was checking whether everything was still in its place. Their son didn't come down to say goodbye. As I walked out the front door, I felt something I can only describe as reluctance in the air behind me. Like leaving too early from a job that expects you to finish the shift. The first few days after I left, I expected the feeling to fade. It didn't. It followed me in small ways I could almost ignore. I began choosing seats more carefully, not out of politeness, out of comfort. In restaurants, I'd gravitate to the same corner spots without deciding. In waiting rooms, I'd pick chairs against walls and feel uneasy if someone sat in my space. I started standing in doorways only long enough to pass through. If I paused, my ears would fill with that same pressure until I moved. I told myself I was building habits, nothing more. Then one day, at work, I caught myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I stopped in the break room and leaned against a counter. Not any counter, a specific spot by the sink where the counter met the wall at a right angle. My body settled against it like it had been searching for that exact alignment all day. The relief was instant. I stood there, heart beating faster, and forced myself to move away. The pressure returned in my ears until I went back. I stayed by the sink until my lunch break ended. I never told anyone. Months later, I visited my sister. She said the house had calmed down. She said they'd stopped inviting people over, and that seemed to help. She said Evan worked even longer hours now, but that was unrelated. She said their son finally slept upstairs again, but he kept his door open. She spoke quickly, like she wanted to get through the summary without lingering. When I stepped into the living room, the air tightened the way it had when someone sat in the wrong place. My sister gestured to the couch. "Sit." I didn't. I stood near the doorway between the living room and kitchen, hand resting on the frame without thinking, weight balanced. The pressure eased. My sister watched me do it. Her smile flickered. "You still do that," she said softly. "Do what?" She looked away. "Stand there, like you're supposed to." I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. "I'm just stretching," I said. She didn't laugh back. Evan came into the room and immediately leaned against the kitchen counter, his usual spot. He looked exhausted. His eyes had the dullness of someone who sleeps but doesn't rest. Their son came down the stairs slowly, one step at a time, feet placed carefully, eyes lowered. When he reached the bottom, he stopped and stared at me in the doorway. His face tightened, like he was trying to remember something he didn't want to remember. "Why are you standing there?" he asked. My sister opened her mouth to answer for me. Evan stayed silent. I said, "It just feels better." The son nodded once. Not agreement, recognition. He walked past the couch without sitting and stood against the wall near the hallway, shoulders pressed flat like he wanted contact with something stable. We talked about normal things, work, school, food, the weather. All of us careful, even when we didn't admit we were. After an hour, my sister asked me again to sit. I tried. I stepped toward the couch and felt the air thicken. I lowered myself slowly, like easing into cold water. The pressure built, my ears filled, my throat tightened, my skin prickled along my ribs. I sat for 10 seconds. Then I stood back up, too quickly, and felt relief rush through me so hard it made me dizzy. My sister didn't ask again. When I left, I stood on the porch and looked back at the windows. Nothing moved. Nothing watched from behind the glass. It looked like any other rental in any other neighborhood, Still, I felt a quiet, steady attention behind the walls, the sense of a system waiting for compliance. On the drive home, I kept adjusting my posture in the car, trying to find an angle that felt right. My shoulders wouldn't settle. My jaw stayed clenched. At a stoplight, I caught myself leaning slightly left, aligning my body with the door frame, the way I'd stood in that house. The pressure eased. I sat like that for the rest of the drive. I'm telling you this because it didn't end when I moved out. It didn't attach to an object I carried. It didn't come home with me in a box. It attached to my sense of space. I can't walk into a room now without feeling immediately where I'm allowed to be. I can ignore it for a while if I focus. I can stand in the wrong place and force myself to stay. My body fights me the whole time, tight and itchy and full-eared, like it's resisting drowning. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up standing in my own apartment doorway with my hand on the frame, balanced, waiting. And the worst part is how natural it feels in the moment, how my body settles like it's finally done arguing. Like somewhere, some house I don't live in anymore is still keeping track of where I belong, and my body is trying to return to that map without asking.